This full committee of Judiciary Non Civil to order, and I'm going to ask Representative Smith to give a word of prayer before we start. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody bow your heads with me, please. Lord, we come to you today just thanking you for the breath of life. Thank you for the sunshine outside. Thank you for this great state. But most of all, Lord, we thank you for your salvation through your Son, Jesus Christ, that we might have life more abundantly and life eternal, and that our relationship with you has been restored, Lord. We just ask, Lord, that you be with this city, that you be with this state as we attempt to heal from the tragedy that occurred last week. Lord, we just ask that you give us the guidance and the wisdom to deal with these situations. Be with those that have lost their family members, Lord. Help fill that void as only you know how, Lord. Lord, as we go forth and do the business today, Lord, we ask that you give us your wisdom and let us do what would be pleasing in your sight. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Representative. Well, it is a beautiful day. It's turned out to be a really nice drive up this morning, and I appreciate everybody that got up early to get here this morning. And we've got many measures to deal with today. In the expectation that it's going to be a fairly long committee meeting, I'm going to ask that if you have redundant testimony, that you try to hold that. If you have any new pieces, please bring that to the chair's attention. And we're trying to work around a bunch of different schedules today. So I'm going to ask that Chairman Watson or Senator Watson, we're going to go ahead and hear Senate Bill 235 first. And we're ready to go. Right up here, Senator Watson. Senator Watson, if you would, read off the LC number you've got so that we know we're all on the same page here. I do recall us having that conversation in subcommittee, and apparently that didn't translate to a new substitute. We can do that here when it comes time, if you like. So go ahead and
to subcommittee with Chairman Reeves. But basically, this is in response to the governor's emergency orders. If you'll recall that prior to the emergency orders, the wearing a mask in the state of Georgia was illegal, and especially in regards to what was in case law via the Supreme Court, if that person wearing a mask or hood intended to threaten, intimidate, basically lines 20, 21, 22, 23. The portion of that I am most interested in as a physician is lines 36 through 38, and that's where when the pandemic is over, rather than it being illegal to wear a mask in the state of Georgia, it will be legal under this guidance of any healthcare agency or healthcare provider to prevent the spread of COVID-19, which most assuredly will still be circulating in our environment, hopefully when the emergency orders are over soon, or other coronaviruses, influenza, or infectious disease. In other words, if I have a patient who's undergone chemotherapy and I'm an oncologist, which I'm not, but it is not uncommon for that oncologist to tell the patient when their immune system is compromised to wear a mask to prevent the spread, to prevent them from getting an infectious disease. And that's what we're trying to do, is that, as you know, and I should have said this from the very beginning, that if when this emergency orders expire and when the governor quits re-upping them, that it will go back to the original law. And again, this was in case law that it was established, lines 20 through 23. We had tried to put it into to have it codified and felt in the testimony in the subcommittee that may complicate things a little bit, so we were going to take it out.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I think I recall in subcommittee that the fear was that since we have a clear interpretation of the law now, the addition of this language, which is codifying case law, could muddy the water, so to speak.
Right.
So I do recall this this change being made in subcommittee, and so I don't have any issue with that here in full committee making that change. Does anybody have any questions or concerns to ask Chairman Watson regarding House Bill 235? Representative Smith.
Good morning, Senator. Appreciate you being out so early. For those of us that was raised on a farm, we're kind of used to this and already lost a crop if we was just starting till now, but I digress. In line 13, the phrase "as to," just one question, and I apologize for not having heard or been able to spoke with the subcommittee on this, but that would basically cover intent. He's intending to wear that mask to conceal their identity in order to perpetuate a crime. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Byrd.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine.
I'm not sure. Nope.
I got you on.
Now? Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to be sure that this is nothing to do with mandating masks after this emergency. Is that correct?
Had not entered my mind, and I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, I was surprised to find out when we were all struck with this pandemic last year that it was illegal to wear a mask, and so I think this is a pretty common sense measure to try and take into account what's happening these days, and we certainly want people to be able to protect themselves with a mask and not be breaking the law. Chairman Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing the bill. And remember this statute from days as a prosecutor, because sometimes if there was an armed robbery where, say, a face was covered, this would be an additional misdemeanor. Now, of course, the focus is the armed robbery charge. It's not so much the misdemeanor. But I guess my question is about element 4. So it's lines 20 to 23 that you're adding. Can you just talk me through? And forgive me, I didn't attend subcommittee where this was discussed, but can you just briefly talk me through the consideration given in those types of circumstances? Let's say it's a carjacking or an armed robbery where the perpetrator's masked up to conceal their identity. And is this going to in any way be an obstacle to prosecution for the offense, because you now have to show that the perpetrator had reasonable foresight that injury would result?
Mr. Chairman, there was the way this passed out of subcommittee was with a amendment to remove these lines. And it's the intent of the chair to ask for an amendment to remove these lines, because I believe that that's the way it passed out of subcommittee and it didn't get translated to full committee. And to your point, the prosecutors that I recall testifying in subcommittee had the very same concern that you have now, in that this is going to make it more confusing, because this is already in case law. These elements here are in case law.
Thanks for catching me up. Thank you.
Yeah. Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And on the same topic, one thing that I unfortunately didn't get an opportunity to raise in sub because I wasn't there, but is there any risk that if we, as a committee, contemplated the standards that are codified in case law, but then decided not to put those standards in, but we do change to add element 3, intends to conceal his or her identity, because we tinker with the code section, the way that the courts would interpret it is that we are now removing the elements that the courts have read into it. Does that strike anybody as a possible risk? Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the intent of the committee is to preserve the court's ability to read in whatever standards they want. So I'm just, from a legislative construction or statutory construction perspective, does anybody have that concern?
The chair doesn't have that concern. I understand what you're saying, Representative McLaurin, but I think that we've been fairly clear, crystal clear, in that we do not want to muddy the waters of the case law. So I don't know that that's going to be an issue, but that's a good point.
Okay, thanks. And again, my concern's only line 19, right? I know people, we propose and remove things all the time, but if we do tinker with the code section and then don't codify it, that's the only thought that I wanted to flag, if there's anything anybody wants to do with it, but yeah.
We don't have anybody signed up for this, Senator Watson. Did you have anybody else you wanted to speak to it?
No, I did not.
Do we have any other discussion from the committee? Hearing no discussions at this time would be appropriate for a motion. Got a move, do pass, and a second. Any amendments? Yes, sir.
Propose an amendment to delete lines 20 to 23. Also, to delete the "and" at the end of line 19 and add an "and" to the end of line 18.
We have a proposed amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? We have a second on the amendment. We have an amendment, so we'll call the chairman administration amendment and a second. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The amendment passes. Of discussion, Representative Thorne.
I'm going to go ahead and be that guy and move to change the semicolon at the end of 19 to a period.
I love it.
We have a second motion to amend. Do we have a second? We have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Like sign? Amendment passes. So we have Senate Bill 235 as amended here in I've got LC 338692S. We've got a motion do pass and a second. All those in favor of passage of this measure signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The measure passes. Congratulations.
Thank
We got a rule sheet. We can get that filled out and signed. They have a rule sheet here in the judiciary right here.
Okay.
If you want to get it signed before you leave, that way.
That'd be
Yeah, I've got to sign it.
great.
Yeah.
Can I just bring it to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. The chairman.
I'm okay. Thank you, Senator.
committee.
All right. Is Senator Albers out there in the hall?
Senator Albert is jumping committees. I don't know if he's.
All right. Well, let's get Ambitardi then. We're going to consider Senate Bill 226. Senator Ambitardi, if you're in the hall, will you come on in?
Here it comes.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Senator. Welcome to Judiciary Non Civil. It's early Monday morning. I
I
know
feel like I'm
this.
starting to get used to this room.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
You've probably been waiting for this all weekend.
Pretty much.
I've got Senate Bill 226 LC 413138S. That's the sub that you have?
Yep.
Okay. Well, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and give us an update on what the bill does, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Senate Bill 226, kind of the originations of the bill came from parents from across Georgia, my district, I believe Senator Strickland's district in Henry County and some others, just dealing with the nature of obscene materials in our school libraries, online material in our school libraries, and felt like that there should be a process for parents to basically address and appeal the material that maybe they or their children, the content of the material that they basically see in their school districts. Speaking as a former Board of Education member from Paulding County, Georgia, I know historically that these processes are really not formalized. I think there's a complaint where you can file a complaint, but in terms of kind of how the districts handle them, it's really not as formal. And parents, from a transparency perspective, really don't know what kind of the rights and responsibilities are in terms of kind of appealing the material that they've seen, or the parents of the children or guardians have seen in the school. So that was kind of why we created 226 and where we came up to today. The original bill, and I know there's the sub we're going to talk about here in a minute, was really a collaborative effort between these families and organizations, and also the metro school districts and other school districts across the state, in terms of creating an appeals process to where, not to try and be too burdensome to the school districts and the administrators and the principals, but I think for there to be some level of transparency for parents to appeal the nature of the materials that they find in question, and also make sure we involve the local boards of education in some way, because the boards of education are the elected members of each school district and are the closest to the citizens who kind of, help determine through the board what policies are best for their local community. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you and the substitute we have before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to ask Chairman Setzler he's had some significant work on this bill, and I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that Chairman Setzler worked all weekend on many of these bills, and I appreciate that determination, and I certainly appreciate your work. So I'm going to turn it over to you for Senate Bill 226 to give a subcommittee report.
Mr. Chairman, such falls to subcommittee chairman and Chairman Reeves doing the same. Again, the sub to 226 is recognizes the issue and recognizes the direction that the author is wanting to take it. Initially there's discussion about this subject matter in previous sessions about taking books off shelves, preventing access to things, and where this goes, as passed the Senate, was it's an issue of creating a clear process where a parent that has concern about material takes to the principal decides, and if there's any interest in appealing, the appeal will be to the local school board. These would be local decisions because, again, these are localized decisions. The sensibilities of what's appropriate might be different in Ware County than in Cobb County. So they are inherently local decisions. What this does also, however, it recognizes that if the appeal does go up to a school board, the school board says, "No, we believe this is appropriate material for children to see," 6th graders, 9th graders, then if it's something they feel strongly that's been appealed, but the school board feels strong enough to stand behind, that it be made available publicly, that adults should be able to see the material that kids are seeing. That was an add to, again, move in the direction of openness, disclosure, as opposed to preventing access, blocking things off. It's just, hey, listen, if this is something that we feel comfortable with our 6th and 7th and 9th graders looking at, no reason someone over the age of 18 shouldn't be able to see it for, as an adult. So that's what the sub does, Mr. Chairman. And appreciate the gentleman's working with the subcommittee to accomplish that.
Thank you, Chairman. I will say this: we had another bill come out of the House and came through this committee that took a different approach to obscene material. I think this measure is a measure that leaves the burden where it belongs. It leaves it locally. Essentially, what this does is it puts together an outline for a process that's required by every board within the state to handle complaints and adjudications of what is obscene. And Chairman Setzler hit on something that myself and my colleagues have talked about. What's obscene is a community standard. It's different depending on where you are. So this allows that standard to be dictated where it belongs, I believe, at the community level. One substantive change was that within this, if you see, I had several phone calls from librarians across the state, and some of them had some apprehension because they have a process in place. And the process that they had in place involved a committee versus a principal. So we added that designee language so that it doesn't necessarily require that the principal make the assessment of what is harmful unilaterally. It'll be a panel within the Board of Education. I think that's good, giving that the board is the ultimate deciding factor. You get a panel at each school so that it's very practical for a parent to complain. And another thing that Chairman Setzler and I spoke about is that it could end there. If the school determines that it not to be harmful, then the parent may not want to appeal it to the board level. I think that it's practical to have it at each school and then appealable to the board. Well, that's the measure. I'm going to ask if there's any questions or discussion from the committee. Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I want to add a word to say I'm thankful for the conversation among the committee about these various proposals. And, you know, I obviously this bill is in a better place than it was when there was a criminal penalty, although obviously I'm going to still have some concerns, and there are going to be some witnesses today that I know who will have concerns. A question I've got, Senator, is how did y'all settle on the 48-month period, both the duration of that period and also the idea that any determination that a material is not harmful should be available for review? Can you just give a little insight into what the 2-year time frame is doing there?
Yeah, I'm actually going to turn that over to Representative Setzler. I think that was part of the work
Chairman,
his
Chairman
committee did.
Setzler, I want to recognize you.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, it was again, as you talked to the author and talked to folks across the spectrum, you know, the idea that it's the term that someone would be in high school, for example. It's an amount of time. You know, the idea that if there was a disclosure, an issue that was raised by parents, you know, one parent came to me and said, "Hey, listen, I like the fact that it's going to be up there. If I don't like the material, but I see it was dealt with last year or the year before, that I don't have to worry about it. It's already gone through the process. I may not like it, but it's already been adjudicated." So it creates a term of high school.
And I misspoke. I said 2 years because I forgot how many months are in a year.
it's
But
4
right,
years.
it's a 4-year
It's a 4-year piece, yeah.
period. Okay.
And the thinking is, in the spirit of openness, that if the school board, if it gives rise to a complaint, it can be handled at the school level. If it gives rise to a complaint and an appeal, and it's adjudicated, hey, we think as a school board, this material is appropriate for kids. Let the public see that, and so we can stand behind what if we're showing kids. Certainly, we should be willing to show adults, and that it has some duration to it. It doesn't just get shown. It's a board meeting. It's done. It's passed on, and you move on past that. It's got the ability for a couple of years to be seen. That issue doesn't come up every year. The same old book every year. We got to deal with this. There's a period of time in which that's recognized, and it requires the school board to have a level of ownership. Hey, we stand behind the material and the content we're sharing with our kids. I think public, adults ought to be able to see sort of the standards that we're upholding in our community.
So can I ask this question then, as kind of a counterweight to the idea that, the public availability of that is now, if I could use sort of a cynical within this building term, a mail program, right, against any Board of Ed member that the public disagrees with, or some members of the public disagree with. Is there a counterweight provision that says, as far as your intention here, that there will be entertained no new challenges for the duration of that 48 months to the same material? Because I could see it being somewhat, dilatory and repetitive and redundant if the same material gets challenged and uses resources over and over again. So, I mean, one thing I'd probably like to see is a guarantee that if there's going to be a 48-month ice out, here's what your local Board of Ed did, that there'd be a corresponding provision that says you can't repeat the same challenge during that same period of time.
Well, I think the gentleman's question could be addressed with another thing that's common to this building, that if a bill is passed by the 2022 General Assembly, could there be an ice out period that General Assembly would come in 22, 23, 24, 25? Perhaps, hypothetically, even the gentleman could be the chair of this committee, would be iced out from ever acting on that action again. We don't ice out future General Assemblies for 3 years from considering something, because we believe that the duly elected, representative should be able to speak to that. So I think the idea is, as you weigh these things out, is that openness, disclosure has a as a great great value for everybody, and that but there is this sense in which school boards are not ashamed of the things they've done, and it's open. But we wouldn't want to preclude any future school board from standing behind that decision or changing that decision should the voters say otherwise.
And if that's true, Mr. Chair, what I would ask is, would it make sense then to put some language that says, or until the board reverses its policy? Because what I wouldn't want is for there to be some sort of perpetual reminder that somebody made a mistake or did the wrong thing just for political purposes, if really the intention is just to inform parents and the public, this is the material that is or is not considered, whatever the designation currently is for purposes of the school's policy. Would that make sense to you all?
Would you see that as and I'm not sure speaking as a member of the committee, I'm not sure I'm opposed to that. Does that create a circumstance that you're shaming them into changing the policy? I mean, do you think it's if it was disclosed for 4 years but what you're saying is until the policy is reversed? I mean, would that, is that something you'd support if we were to do that?
When you say support, I would probably support the amendment, but I might circumscribe my support there. I think the point I'm trying to get at is, obviously, and the chair and I had this conversation, there are lots of constituencies in this building that ask for lots of movement on lots of policy. But what we don't want to do in a sort of reactive way whenever we make policy is give a small group of people whatever leverage or opportunity to, choose their own outcomes or use shame or use that word you used in order to pressure school boards to act a certain way, right? We want there to be balance. And so I wouldn't want a 4-year, notice provision to be abused essentially in a way that would cause more pressure or shame than it's supposed to, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the gentleman to sort of step back from the discussion and ask the question. We're talking about shame here. We're talking about content that we're sharing with kids in an educational setting that's been deemed. I mean, the standard that exists in the existing bill has been deemed that on its whole, predominantly taking as a whole, lacking serious literary, artistic, political, scientific value to minors. I mean, what we're talking about is content that has been determined by a school leader or their panel and an elected board of officials. So both full-time staff professionals and electeds, both have stood behind the content. If we're saying that content through a professional review and an elected review is worth standing behind, I don't see any reason the adults shouldn't be able to see that. That's the issue. I mean, it may be a policy difference. I don't think it's a matter of shame. I think it's a matter of public disclosure. If it's good enough for kids to see, adults should be able to see it.
And the last comment I'll make is just that, there are similar generalities we can make, for example, in the context of the Fourth Amendment. If you have nothing to hide, why are you worried about the government search, that sort of thing? Like, clearly some sort of perpetual notice could be justified by that sense that, well, you stood behind it, so there's no problem. I guess what I would say, though, is, and this gets to a really touchy issue, I think, for a lot of people, one of the materials in the packet that we received had to do with trans identity. And I know that particular material, was at one subcommittee meeting for the criminal version of this bill. And that particular material, I didn't peruse it honestly carefully enough to know if it was over sexualized or not, based on, in terms of what would be appropriate for an elementary school kid versus middle school or high school. All I'm saying is, I think that this type of mechanism, the way that it's codified like this, could create the opportunity for some very vocal individuals to use a political flashpoint like trans identity and sort of politicize boards of education and their decision making in a way that isn't currently available under law, right? And it's fine. I mean, if boards of education are put in that position, when I say it's fine, I know boards of education who believe that certain ideas should be freely discussed among students will stand behind that decision. But it just, my concern with this bill, and I think we'll hear more about it, is that it creates the opportunity to politicize these decisions even more than they already are for purposes of generating outrage, generating culture conflict, et cetera. But that's, and I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the amount of time I've had to speak today, but that's my primary concern.
Thank you, Representative McLaurin and Chairman Setzler. Being we have a very or a fairly long agenda today, I'm going to limit the discussion further. I'm going to recognize one more representative, and then we're going to go to our folks in the hall, and I'm going to limit them to 3 to 5 minutes. Representative Smith.
Thank you. And I want to thank my one of my senators that represents part of my House district for bringing such a great piece of legislation. I guess I'll ask you this question. This 48-month period, I would be very suspect of changing that language, in all due respect to my colleague. This to me, when I was reading it, reminded me of what Madison and Jay and Hamilton had talked about guarding against the passions of the people, passions of the electorate. 1 year being swayed one way, 1 year being swayed to the next. And I think this, so many times I think we see legislation that it just flip flops back and forward. And I think this is a good safeguard that, I don't know if anybody else got that from reading it. I did. Maybe I'm just crazy, but this seems to guard against that passion. You have an influx of folks move from out of town, say a natural disaster were to hit, heaven forbid, and they come into your community, and that may very well look very different for about a year's time. And so I think this would guard against that. Would that be your assessment, Senator?
So, well, first, thank you, Representative Smith, for the question and what you do for our community in Haralson County. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, I mean, it's about transparency. Everything in our school districts are very transparent because we're dealing with minors. I've had this debate, whether it's for material, whether it's to athletics, whether it's to what we're doing with our special needs families. Every element, we need to empower the parent to kind of make the decision what is best for them inside the classroom and obviously outside the classroom. I think under current law and under current processes, in this situation, I don't know that the parent really feels as empowered and knowing what their rights are at the end of the day. And I think that's kind of where this goes. I think, whether you post this on the website, wherever you end, wherever you land on that debate, I think it's just adding a level of transparency. I think one of the things we talked about as this bill was kind of moving through the process is local districts are probably not going to have a lot of complaints in terms of volume on this in some cases. I think at the end of the day, a parent should, feel like there is relief for themselves without having to, go around a process that is kind of made up as you go, or feeling like they have to go get legal counsel in order to protect their rights, which we've seen in so many other cases, in our school districts at times when the relief may not be apparent. The other thing I want to call the committee's question to or attention is just, line 62, where DOE will promulgate a model policy around this. So at the end of the day, I mean, their local school districts are going to have a say. This policy is going to be laid on the table probably for 30 days around that time. So the local boards, the staff, the principals, the administrators will have input in kind of what the final, piece is going to look like as it is prescribed in the law. But again, this is all about, people kind of controlling, what do they want in their own community. And I don't believe that the state in any way is doing that in this bill.
Thank you. At this point, we're going to go to the folks in the hall. Again, I'm going to ask Nan Brown to come in. But while they're making their way in, if you're listening in the hall and you hear testimony that sounds verbatim what you're going to say, please respect the time of the committee. And while I want to hear everyone out, we have many measures to consider. So will Nan Brown and Amanda Lee please come in? Y'all come up here to the mics, if you will. Right. If you will, introduce yourself and who you're with, and tell us what you'd like to hear. I'm going to limit time to 3 to 5 minutes, so if you'd be mindful of that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me clearly through my mask?
Yes.
My name is Amanda Lee. I am the president-elect of the Georgia Library Media Association and our co-advocacy chair. Nan Brown, who is passing out a packet to all of you, is also a member of the Georgia Library Association and advocacy chair. And we're here today to kind of clear up some, I think, misinformation related to Senate Bill 226. and want y'all to understand what the current policies and procedures are in school libraries. So the Georgia Library Media Association is our state level affiliate of the American Association of School Libraries, which is under the American Library Association. We have about over 580 members currently, even though there are much more school librarians than that here in Georgia. And we are here to speak against this bill because we feel it's unnecessary. Currently, under Georgia DOE Rule 164-4-01, media programs are already required to have media policies that establish a media committee at the system level and at each school, and requires development of procedures for the school system and for selecting materials locally and handling requests for reconsideration of materials, generally known as book challenges. So there's already a state rule that requires this process. Pretty much all counties that we know of have their own local policies. It starts on the school level. And so if a parent has a concern about any material in the library, that they fill out a form, it goes to the local library committee, which includes parents, administrators, other educators. That committee makes a decision. If the parent or the individual who brought the challenge is unsatisfied, that decision can be then appealed to the district level. And then from the district level, it can be appealed to the school board level. So there's already 3 levels. They're all committee based because these are decisions that should be handled by a group of people. They should not be handled by one. So that's one of our main concerns, is the language about principals making these decisions. School librarians have master's degrees in library media programs. We are experts in collection development and analyzing youth literature. And so it needs to be part of a committee so that we can help guide that information.
I didn't know if you were aware, but this committee substitute does add that language. So principal or designee would capture any type of panel. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
We actually got the substitute out in the hall about 3 minutes ago.
Things move quickly.
Things do move quickly. I still would recommend that principal is scratched and that it is simply that the school level decision-making committee, that we emphasize committee. Also wanted to point out that many issues that we have experienced personally, the librarians and the parents work out those issues directly. So if a parent says, I don't want my child to read The Handmaid's Tale, I say, no problem. Your child is not required to read The Handmaid's Tale. If that is a book assigned in their classroom, then the teachers always have alternatives. If it's a book simply on the library shelf, then we notate it in the library system and say, this child cannot read this book. What we don't want to allow, and we don't want this process to foster, is for a parent or a small group of parents to decide what all students can read or can't read. And I will give you a very heartfelt example. My child is 7 years old, and I think that he should have access to books that have LGBTQ content. And why? That's his family. That's his community. He deserves to have access to books that represent his life. Often, book challenges in the last 10 years have to do with LGBTQ content. I'm concerned that if we create this new policy, that it will allow his libraries not to have books that are reflective of his life experience because somebody else has a problem with that. And I don't think that that's right. And I don't think that we should do that. Nan, do you have some additional information?
In the packet, there is the current code. And we unfortunately did not have a DOE media liaison, library media liaison, for several years. Danita Hinckley became that liaison part-time in the fall, but it is a pent-up demand for her job because she sent out an email last Tuesday asking districts, please let me know, do you have a selection and a reconsideration policy for your school or district? She got 107 responses as of Friday to a Tuesday survey, and 75, that represented 75 districts in Georgia. All of them except and one independent school said they did not have one. All the other people who said no It was for their school because their district did have one. So the concern that we heard from the committee that this was not in place in counties is erroneous. It is a rule, it has been implemented, that parents are not happy with the results of a process or individual situations where something happens because of personalities. That's not a failure of the process. And, you know, if we want less law rather than more, why are we creating a law for something that a rule is in place for? It seems to us like this is a professional development opportunity for Georgia DOE and for us as an association to have districts have training for districts through our RESAs, through our state organization to get people on board. I do have 2 examples of policies from.
You're running
Okay.
close to time. If you guys, I know I hate to put you on a schedule, but we've got many people signed up for this bill. So if you wouldn't mind wrapping it up, and I do appreciate you coming and
Yes. So we wanted to address
that's
one more
fine.
thing, which was EBSCO.
okay.
And I do have 3 letters from students talking about EBSCO.
Mhm.
And we have not seen any problem. None of our members have reported a problem. I think the students who wrote you letters, the high schools who wrote you letters, say it best. That's not where kids are going to go to find obscene materials. They're going to use their unfiltered, data-driven phones, and they're going to do VPNs. I mean, the cases I know of in schools, because our school does a sweep periodically of kids who have installed filter bypasses. Like, this is not a real issue.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your testimony. Thank you. It's Nan Brown and Amanda Lee.
Yes.
I really appreciate you coming to the committee. I really do. And thank you for your testimony.
you for your
And I
time.
apologize for having to move quickly here, but we can certainly talk offline. I thank you for your testimony. If you would send in Adam Pipkin.
Thank you to Representative Burchett for talking to your local media specialist.
Thank you for having him call. I appreciate that. Would you introduce yourself, please, and tell us what you'd like us to hear?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Adam Pipkin. I'm the Executive Director for Faith and Freedom Coalition of Georgia, and we are here to speak in favor of the bill. We believe this bill does a great job of placing a framework in place of a transparent appeals process. On the Senate side, when they did their hearing, we heard some pretty, what I would call, shocking testimony that I believe you'll hear today. Some stuff that it's hard to imagine is kind of going on in some of our schools, and that's I think it's fair to say it's not going on everywhere, but there are some school districts that have some areas of concern, and we believe this empowers parents, and we ask for your favorable consideration for this bill.
Well, I appreciate that, Adam. Is that everything you wanted to tell us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, he's got a few minutes left. The other crew ran over. Anybody have any questions? If not, let's move on to
Thank you all.
Mike Griffin, please.
Just as a quick note, I will be presenting Senate Bill 85.
Good.
How are you today? Please introduce yourself and let us know what you want us to know about Senate Bill 226.
Yes, sir. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm the Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. And thank you for the opportunity to just say a word or two. Appreciate the Senator for this very important legislation. Georgia Baptists have represented up to 3,600 churches in our state. So that's well over 1 million people with a lot of children. Of course, all children are very, very important. We're reminded of the scripture where Jesus said, I guess about 3 different places in the Gospels, that whoever would cause one of these little ones to stumble be better that a millstone be tied about their neck and cast into the deepest part of the sea, which that kind of comment says that we really can't be too protective of our children First of all, because they're very vulnerable, but just looking at it just from an impact standpoint on children being impacted by the reading or the visual part of obscene material is very detrimental. And we were part of some legislation a number of years ago that dealt with obscenity, the viewing of obscenity. We know that even has a health issue. It has a negative impact on children. And then we do a lot in protecting children against sex abuse and those types of things. And one of the primary ways that children are pushed into sexual behavior at a young age is the grooming process. And the last thing that our school system wants to do is to intentionally and definitely unintentionally be a part of grooming children for sexual predators by exposing them to this type of literature and material. And then also the sex trafficking industry as well preys upon our young very much. So it's important that we have safeguards. And so I appreciate this committee's favorable support on this kind of legislation, because in the society that we're living in today, I don't think we can do too much to protect our children. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He's got a little time left. If you'd like to ask any questions, any committee members? Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here.
Yes, sir.
We just heard testimony from Ms. Lee a few minutes ago that one of her concerns about what's animating this bill is that there might be people who don't want public schools to have literature that depicts LGBTQ families. Would you be willing to go on the record and dispel her concern that you have no objection to public school literary materials that depict LGBTQ families as normal?
Well, we're not here to talk about sexual orientation, gender identity. This is about a parent recognizing that there's obscene material, and that has particularly to do with body parts. So it's not necessarily talking about some kind of activity.
I think this is, the witness's testimony or stance on whichever side of that issue has no bearing on what the school board will do if this measure passes. So him going on record doesn't have any bearing against what the school and each individual school will determine is harmful to children, respectfully.
Well, this would relate pretty much to what the obscenity law deals with, and this would be what this deals with as well.
Representative McLaurin.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is because in fairness, that's not, they say you should never ask a question on cross-sex you don't know the answer to, and I legitimately don't know the answer to this question. I mean, what I'm offering is an opportunity for that argument to speak to the argument we heard earlier and to see if there is any discomfort there, because I think part of what we're trying to get at is, I understand that, we can define obscenity in a number of ways and we can focus on the worst versions of it when we're talking about this. But when rubber meets the road in terms of, how this bill actually pans out, my concern would be that, as we heard testimony from the last 10 years, if objections to literary materials are going to have to do with this cultural flashpoint, I just would like to make sure that the support we're seeing today is not in interest of pursuing that cultural flashpoint.
The support is that children should not be promoting or there should not be literature that promotes children's sexual activity as a minor, regardless of what you may or I may see as being good or bad.
And again,
it's just wrong in that area is what we're looking at today.
Again, I want to weigh in and say that, and I didn't have a chance to ask the Nan or Amanda because they ran over time, but the question I would have asked is that they have the process in place now, and if it's not being determined as harmful now, this won't change that. This just puts a format in place that they have to have this process.
Right.
Let's see where we at. Mike, did you have anything else? Mr. Griffin, excuse me. Sorry.
No, sir.
Hold on, we got one flashing light. We're running over time. Chairman Sessler, if you'd be brief, please.
And Mr. Griffin, isn't it true that the definition of harmful to minors is the same definition that if it were given to a kid in another context would be a crime?
Right.
We're not, so the strike zone that's being evaluated, isn't it true, is not one that we're giving to school boards to sort of make up on their own out of whole cloth. It's the definition of content that if it were given to your next door neighbor kid, you'd be committing a crime. Using that same strike zone, it gives parents an ability to ask the question, doesn't this meet that same level of concern of non-probity and those kinds of things to the schools? And if the schools, again, stand behind it, it's not shutting things down. It's just saying, hey, here, we're standing behind this material because we believe it's got that educational value. So it's.
Yes, I agree. And I think in a very fair manner to do that as well.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
appreciate your testimony. I can't read this. Noel, starts with a K. Noel K. Noel Kahan. Please come in. Thank you. Would you introduce yourself to the committee and let us know what you'd like to know about 226, please?
Yes, my name is Noelle Han, and I am in support of SB 226. I believe we need a clear process for parents where they are not shamed and their children are not alienated. Actually, I have recently been alienated since my last testimony in this room. I have been blocked from the third-party vendor, who is EBSCO. I can no longer access the material I was able to access right here. I have been blocked as a parent, but my children can still see this information, and children around the state can still see these obscene materials. I find it highly retaliatory and ironic that I, as a parent, have been blocked, but children still have access. Also, I think decisions need to be made locally by elected school board members. That is very important. You'll hear testimony about that today. Also important is the transparency. If children can see this material, I believe parents and I as a parent should be able to see this material with no problems. Thank you.
Well, that was short. We got 4 minutes left. Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, I'm going to ask that Gail Troyer come in, please. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Come in and sit right here at mic 4. Introduce yourself to the committee and tell us what you like about 226.
Okay, I am Gail Troyer, and I have been here at the Capitol for over 30 years, basically lobbying at no expense except my own expense for coming down here. And I do it because I love children and I love the Lord. And I do thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with all of you. And but I have tremendous concern still with this bill, and I want to share why. Some of you do know that 25 years ago, it's some of us that found this obscenity exemption, and that was after finding a very pornographic book in our middle schools. So we basically, and it was called Changing Bodies, Changing Lives. It was the most well-read, used book in the library, and it's truly heartbreaking, and I know it breaks God's heart that some here under the Gold Dome aren't seeing the real importance of getting harmful influences from our children's minds and out of the schools. I took 3 pages of excerpts that I took from that book to every state representative. They gasped. They couldn't believe what was in our schools. And now it's in K through 12, whether it's being in material or through virtual. But recently I've heard similar remarks from some of our GOP members that I respect very much, but disagree greatly, as I heard 25 years ago from our Democratic speaker, Tom Murphy. And he says, but I can't put my little librarians in jail. I said, I don't want you to do that. I just want you to get this horrible stuff that's hurting children out of the schools. I'm sure that you can make time frames. You can let them know, that they've got this much time to get it out and do it. Well, unfortunately, it didn't happen. It didn't pass, as you can see from today. And instead of it getting better, it's more and more stuff put in, and now in younger grades. And It's really, you know, children are taking all of this in, and they're vulnerable, not responsible, but adults are. These people that's put it in there are responsible. And okay, so they didn't pass it, but they did do something else. They ended up removing that book from all over the state, and even other states went on, because the same day that it hit the House floor, it started being read over statewide radio, and they had parents calling in. They were livid. They could not believe this kind of stuff were in their schools. So for the 25 years, like I said, they've added more and more. And I say shame on them for doing that to these innocent minds. But the good thing is, I think when we let more and more parents know what's going on, they are not going to be happy today either. And our schools should be safe havens. They should not be infiltrated by outside sources to put in stuff that is harmful. And it harms these innocent minds. You know, these children are being enticed. So what do? It's coming from the schools, right? It's okay. So let's try it on other children. You'll find drastic increases in promiscuity and rapes and STIs and pregnancies and abortions and just all of this stuff that now come to sex trafficking, pedophilia, and harmful things to these children. Why in the world do they put that stuff to harm these children? Have you really thought about it? Usually it's money. My goodness, it seems like many here aren't using your hearts, you're using your minds. And you just need to see the harmful effects for these children that's multiplied for so long.
Ms. Troyer, we're running up on time now. If you would,
I'm just there. I'm at this far away.
would you
okay?
wind it? If you
I
wind it
will,
up, I
I will.
appreciate
Thank
it. I
you.
hate to rush you, but we have
No, thank you.
four more
I'm
people
this
that have
far
to speak.
away.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So anyway, these outside influences are definitely harmful. And I just feel like there's too much fear here of outside sources in courts and things like that. And, you know, our Bible tells us to fear God, not man. So I'm just saying, let's do what's right for our children. Let's truly think about, I'll quote scripture. I've told all these years not to quote any scripture. He tells us to rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. These children are the most vulnerable. And so I am just saying, even though I know y'all have worked hard on this, there's been compromises, I still say they had time all these years to make it right, and they have not. They have not done what's right. And I still believe that there needs to be this exemption. It needs to be removed. And if it was me or others that went and put it in children's hands, we would be put in jail. So anyway, that's all I have to say. I thank you. I know some of you for many years. I respect you greatly. And I'm sorry if I've hurt you with some of my words, but I have been angry over some of this stuff. And some of you have taken a long time to answer, dear Representative Reeves. And of course, I still don't agree with it, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Troyer. I appreciate your testimony.
Okay.
Jennifer Cartier, please come in.
That's a question.
Sure.
So I'm understanding that the lady believes this doesn't go far enough in protecting kids, is what?
That's what it sounds like to me.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for serving the state of Georgia. We appreciate you guys. I am a mom, a mother of three, who found it was required reading for juniors and seniors who were taking this course. And I decided to look through the book and discovered I was appalled at the content in the book. So much so that I don't feel comfortable reading it, but Noelle has offered to read it for me. And this is just one passage. I'm happy to email you all of the other passages that were obscene. Can you do that? Thanks.
My red skirt is hitched up to my waist, though no higher. Below it, the commander is fucking. What he is fucking is the lower part of my body. Serena Joy grips my hands as if it is she, not I, who is being fucked. And if she, as it is, she finds it pleasurable or painful, and the commander fucks with a regular 2/4 marching stroke, on and on like a tap dripping. It's as if he is somewhere else, waiting for himself to come, drumming his fingers on the table while he waits. There's an impatience in his rhythm now, but isn't this everyone's wet dream, 2 women at once?
Thank you. I'd remind you that this bill, that's my opinion, and the opinion of each one of these committee members has no bearing on what this bill does. What this bill does is creates a structure, and you know that's graphic to me, and I don't want my kids reading that. But what we're here to talk about is this bill, and this bill presents a structure to allow parents to go and complain and then let the local school board determine what is obscene. So I do appreciate that. That does have a profound effect, I believe, on the committee. And I appreciate you. Well, I don't know if I appreciate you reading or not, to be honest with you.
That was just one.
But go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, the reason I feel that it's so necessary to pass this bill is that I tried to go through the avenues that they had in place, which meant that my husband and I could meet with a committee. He happened to be out of state, so he couldn't show up. And we met in the media center, and basically anybody who was there who felt strongly that this book was not appropriate was not allowed to speak. They would not let me read their letters. They basically escorted them all out of the media center and shut the doors. And it was me against a handpicked group of teachers and parents, all who were against what I had to say. And it became very apparent to me that no matter what research I had done, that it wasn't important for any AP exam. It didn't matter what I had said. Their decision had been made, and I was shut down, and they never told me any other avenue that I could take after that. It was just a done deal. And I was shocked. It didn't matter. I am a big volunteer. I substitute teach at the high school. I was well liked, and my kids were well liked. I got lots of compliments from teachers. None of that mattered. It was basically, you are not going to tell us who are teachers what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And that's how I felt as a parent. I had zero power. And honestly, it had nothing to do with burning books or anything like that. It was just obscene. And I didn't think that the students should be reading it.
Well,
So
that's compelling to me, in that, and one of the big, for me, the thing that the bill accomplishes is that it puts a timeline on this, and it gives an appeals process. So in the scenario that you're talking about, if this measure were to pass, then you would sit before that same panel, but you'd have the opportunity to appeal to the Board of Education. So the timeline to me is a big kicker, and the fact that now if a board deems something to be not harmful, then they post that and they own it. They have to own it. So
exactly.
they own what they believe is not harmful.
Right. And I can be very transparent that the majority of the parents, they have no clue about the content they just assume that the library is full of books that are appropriate for children. They had no idea. Everybody that I sent my email to was shocked. Didn't matter what side of the party they were on, they were just shocked.
Ms. Carty, I appreciate your testimony. unfortunately, we've run out
Okay.
on time. I'm going to
Thank
ask
you,
the
thank
next
you.
test, first, see, George Ray, if you'd come in. Thank you for your testimony. Yes, sir. Number 4. If you'd introduce yourself to the committee and tell us what you like.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is George Ray. I'm here with the Georgia Education Coalition. Appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly on the substitute to Senate Bill 226. The Georgia Education Coalition is a association of 12 public school districts that serve 40% of Georgia's school population. We have no interest in putting obviously material in front of students, and we are appreciative of Senator Dan Vitarte's efforts to address that issue. We do believe most schools and most districts have process in place, but we have enjoyed the opportunity to work with Senator Anna Vitarte to improve this bill. I've taken a look at the substitute that's being considered today, and I do have one concern or potential amendment that I'll just throw out there, and that is on page 3 between lines 54 and 61. And this relates to the availability of the materials for public review that are going through the appeal process, and specifically about the electronic availability. Schools have licensing agreements for electronic material. They have physical books for some of these. Putting these materials online is a non-starter. So what I would recommend, and I can offer language if anyone's interested, is to make this a material available for review at the office of the local school district rather than electronically online. That will provide public access to review the materials that are in question, and address the legal and physical issues of not being able to provide it online.
So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a conversation that Chairman Sessler and I have had, and I'm going to let Chairman Sessler weigh in on this. Chairman Sessler.
Your concern is exactly why lines 58 through 61 are crafted. Each local board of education shall make accommodation in its material license agreements. The public access shall be made available to accomplish purposes paragraph. You've got tens of thousands of kids that have access in one county. For example, we have 110,000 kids in Cobb County schools. To suggest that somebody who contacts the school board online and wants to be able to have online access can't be, that a licensing agreement can't be made for some number of individuals, again, a relatively small number, to do that is just not true. It's absolutely, if you're contracting for tens of thousands of students and parents access, to suggest there can't be a parallel process that for someone to contact the school system to be provided, it's factually false. So, that's one of the reasons that provision was put in there, because the school board says instead of having 10,500, we need 10,530, the 30 people in a year that would call and ask about this. That's well within the province of school boards to be able to make happen.
Go ahead.
If I may respond, a couple response to that. First, with regard to the electronic materials, remember there are multiple sources of this material. It's not a single database. It's not a single license agreement. So when you look at across all the school districts, and then even with individual school districts, you're dealing with multiple providers of electronic information that involve multiple license agreements. So the time and expense of going back and renegotiating those is a challenge. Also, it should be noted these are in some cases multi-year license agreements that may not be up in the near future. So for the electronic materials, that's what I would say to that. And then remember also with regard to physical materials, those don't have license agreements. They have physical books and physical materials that can't be put online without violating copyright. And our districts who are out there with material that are posted online are getting cease and desist letters when they post that online. It's a real issue that has to be dealt with on the legal side.
And Mr. Chairman, that's precisely why we have this. It's a falsehood to say that you can't, that a school board, within all the powers we have, and again, we as the legislature, we're in the shall business, not the may business, that it becomes too burdensome when you think about the electronic books. You think about the fact that students' textbooks now largely, my kids 6 years ago in public schools they didn't have textbooks, they were using online books. Broadly across our county and Cobb and other counties, there's online delivery of content every single day. To suggest it's in a $200 textbook here that I'm holding up is not the standard across most of our counties. Whether it's a Catcher in the Rye book, whether it's something else, whether it's on content that's served up by EBSCO. We anticipated this, and it's not an attack on you, But the contention that, oh, there's copyright issues, leave it up to the professionals, is a dodge of the fact that this content's been being delivered electronically to every single kid. Mr. Chairman, their kids are getting exclusively online education. Every single bit of content's delivered to them online. So to suggest that a licensing agreement can't be made for any content delivered in the schools, the gentleman may not be aware of it, but it's factually not true. It's being done across our state by the hundreds of thousands. And this bill simply seeks to clarify, it is your duty to establish those licensing agreements. And it's because it's well within the province and ability of schools to deliver that.
Respond, please.
I can respond. Well, I will say I agree. I'm not the expert in drafting these agreements, but I would also argue that no one in the room probably has been involved in drafting of those agreements. What I would say is the proposal to make this a physical review or accessible in district office solves the problem without having to get into it. If we provide public access to it in the offices for parents and interested individuals to come, that solves or provides for the review that's being sought here. So,
and Mr. Chairman, I would simply say that the coming by the school district office is burying under a rock. It's a rock that's in the district office. There's really no public disclosure then. It's come in and take time off work, and you can root through some pages in a folder. I think that's certainly against the purpose of the gentleman's bill.
Mr. Ray, do you have anything else?
No.
No.
Any other questions?
No. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The last one we have signed up was Robert Costley. Mr. Costley, would you sit right there at 4 and introduce yourself and let the committee know what you'd like us to know?
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to bring up a text here. Good afternoon now. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee, Senator. It's great to be here. Thank you for just having the opportunity to weigh in. And representing those, I'm a former middle school principal myself and superintendent, and I don't mind telling you I'm also an advanced placement literature teacher back in the day. It's been a while. And I also want to say, just because I think we need to add it, is I'm also a veteran of the United States Navy. I served right after the first Persian Gulf War, served my time patrolling the Persian Gulf so that we uphold Old Glory sitting outside that room. And one of the things that we're talking about today is Old Glory and what it represents. And sometimes the conflict that we have, we're trying to do what's right in raising our kids in this great country, because no principal in this state wants smut in their library. And if they admit that they want smut in the library, they shouldn't be working in any school. And most people like me make sure that they don't work in any school in Georgia. I just want to make sure that that's clear. We can talk about good policy and disagree on how that policy is implemented without having to say that we don't agree about good content in our schools. The first thing I would like to do is just commend the senator who worked extensively. As you know, this started as a criminal bill, and the focus appeared to be more on dealing with people rather than concerns about content. I really appreciate the direction that is going, because that's what we're trying to deal with. How can a parent in a county or city system deal with the concern and make sure that it's fairly heard? I will also say on behalf of our members, I don't think we have a problem with that. There's a couple of things, though, that I want to point out. The first one is the idea in line, forgive me, I'm having to, line 50. Thank you. Line 50. Appeals of the school principals or his or her designee's determinations provided for in paragraphs 4 and 5 of this subsection shall be subject to full substantive review of the board. I'm sorry, line 40. The school principal or his or her designee shall determine whether student access to the material shall be removed or restricted. In line 38, it says the school principal or his or her designee shall determine him or herself, I'm going to add that, whether that material is subject to the complaint is harmful to minors. I have a concern that we're going to put a burden on a principal to decide him or herself, because it appears that the law intends to put the burden on one human being in this world to determine whether content is abhorrent or obscene to minors or inappropriate to minors. I will point out that The Handmaid's Tale can be bought at Barnes & Noble's right now and sold to any minor in the state of Georgia. With that said, there are three tenets to the value proposition that I'm assuming principals will deal with in this policy that board set up. And number 3 says, when taken as a whole, is the content lacking in serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors? It is my belief that number 3 will wipe out most of the complaints that are not appropriate for our folks. Age appropriate. There will be some books that might have content in it that have huge literary value in preparing them for college or the workplace. With that said, I would like to ask if the committee or the senator would entertain some kind of addendum so that it's clear that the principal, what he or she is really doing is supervising and enforcing the policy that the Board of Education set up. He himself, I don't think we can ask or burden one human being to make a determination on such an important process. If that appeals to the board, what the board wants to see, and I've worked with boards for many, many years, the board wants to see, did my principal that we hired appropriately entertain the complaint resolution process and take the feedback that was given and make sure that process worked properly, so that the Board of Education then in its view can then decide whether the principal and the members, was the complaint viewed properly, and then the Board of Education can rule appropriately. In this law, it would be ruling really whether the principal made the right decision or not. And I would say that's what we're talking about. That's the difficulty why all these people are sitting in the hallway, is how do we deal with those things without going on a witch hunt for people and for educators.
Excuse me. I take your point. I understand what you're saying. And so in drafting this legislation, and I'm reading into what the author has to say. So we have to take into consideration, not just Fulton County, we got to take in consideration Atkinson County or Eccles County, where maybe they don't want to they don't have, their current structure is just that the principal does determine what is harmful and what is not harmful. We left it to where the principal could do it, or he could use a designee, which, as I understand it, my media specialist called me. They have a process. They have a panel. So this doesn't say, as I read it, that the principal has to make the determination. He can be the end all be all. He or she can be the one that determines whether it's harmful and whether it's accessible. But also the designee can also can do the same thing. So we were trying to be flexible to the nature of the state, in that you have small communities that maybe they want to do this from a principal's standpoint, and then larger communities may want a panel. I would say to you, regardless of whether it's a principal or the designee or the panel, it all appeals to the board. The ultimate decision making is at the board's feet. Does that answer any of your questions?
Mr. Chairman, you have, it's very salient points. The only thing I would add to it, just for your consideration, sir, is when we're talking about books and the history for the last 100 years of what has happened in rooms of boards of education around books, and now EBSCO and all those other things that need to be addressed, those tend to be very, very contentious, very personal processes where our principals are responsible for many, 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 many things, but I don't know that any of them have this law seems to put way too much thought on what one human being thinks. And these communities, if there was a small group that wanted to take this too far, they could point to the principal's job was to decide whether this book was appropriate or not, and the principal failed, and they put it on the principal rather than the principal's job to make sure that the policy. So I'm asking you to think about our principals who are going to be enforcing this, and not make that a political process for them, but more make it for an administrative duty process for the principals to make sure. And the only other point I would say, and I will be finished with my time, is boards of education have been ruling on these matters for 100 years, and they already have the authority. I guess I would say the Board of Education piece in here appears to be redundant to us because they already have the authority as the tribunal for all matters in the school system.
Well, we have to put it in there so there's a timeline. That's the beauty of this thing. This sets out a structure of a timeline that when this had to be handled. So in other words, we've heard testimony where you have parents that had an ambiguous process that maybe they go in and they say, this seems to be an issue, and a panel hears it, and then it just, sits somewhere for, any amount of time. So this to me, the beauty of it is the time structure piece. I take your point regarding the principal. Maybe the witness, do you have anything to say to that?
I mean, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I hear what Mr. Costley's saying. I don't know that this is necessarily structured to where it kind of pins down the principal per se. I think because of the outlet to the school board. I mean, I think this does allow for the facilitation of the principal to work with his or her committee or others. I think in the school itself to I think arise at a decision for the parent. And I think collectively, in a sense, I mean, I think that allows it to be a community decision at the same time. At least right now, and I mean, just saw this before we walked in the door. I mean, need to digest whether there's some unintended consequences. But right now, as I'm reading it, I don't know that there really is.
I have a few lights flashing. Mr. Costley, I appreciate your testimony. Thank you for coming in. I do appreciate you coming. I got a few lights flashing, but at this point, we're at the end of our list of folks that are they're going to speak. I'm going to ask during a discussion if you have questions or concerns. Let's do that. At this point, now would be the appropriate time for a motion. Move to pass. We have a second. We have a second. Any discussion? Representative Bodie.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I think what we're hearing from the Georgia Library Media Association and also hearing from the gentleman that just came and spoke, line 23 through 24 gives me a lot of pause even before he stated that, because it becomes very subjective. You may have one group that says this is good literary for my child. It has some type of political or artistic value, and you might have another set of parents that say it doesn't. And also, I do have a lot of pause with the appeals process, where you have the principal or, like you stated, his designee or her designee to make this determination. I think if we have local boards that already have the book challenge process, I think we should build off of that and let the locals kind of come up with that, because what we don't want to do is, as elected officials of the General Assembly, start to play on what's free speech and for our local jurisdictions, being if it's a board of education or a city council. I think that becomes a slippery slope for us, because right now we're talking about sexual content. Tomorrow we can talk about what's harmful based on race, what's harmful based on demographics, what's harmful based on age. And you sat in a con law class like I have. We could get in a very, very dangerous spot when we start to go down this road.
I hear what you're saying, particularly to lines 23 and 24. I believe that comes directly out of a Supreme Court case. So I don't know that we need to determine or change that. I think that's left up to them. But to your second point, we're setting a floor here. If these boards of educations want to make it more strict or harder well, we're not setting a floor. We're setting a structure, and the structure is you have to have this complaint process. You have to have it done within a due amount of time, so some due process here, and giving them appeal. As the gentleman stated just recently, they already have the ability to do this, but some places are not doing it. And if they are doing it, this fits in line with what they're doing now, as I see it. Anybody else have any discussion? What number are you?
10.
Representative Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman's point that testified, putting the burden on an individual person, in this case, the principal, is there anything in the bill that prohibits that principal from creating his or her own review panel within the community, whether they take from teachers in the school, parents in the community, or local business owners. Is there anything in the bill that prohibits that?
It can be his designee, so that could be a panel, that could be one person. So it could be the principal or his designee. So
One further.
I don't read it as prohibiting that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One further note, just for the record, I think it needs to be stated that Barnes and Noble is not a taxpayer funded entity.
That's fact.
Thank you.
Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I looked at my crystal ball, and I think a few of us, I've predicted that a few of us will oppose this all the way through. Just to succinctly attempt to state the concern here so that we can frame up the debate we're going to have and are already having. This bill appears to be a way to codify an existing rule, but with more clarity about what process is required, again, uniformly statewide in statute, for the purpose of providing more political leverage to, again, parents who do feel disempowered. I mean, we heard testimony that a parent felt disempowered. So this is an attempt to empower people who are excluded from some sort of normative or mainstream conversation about what is happening in schools, and to give them more political leverage. And so I think it's important for us to recognize, again, if it's true that I think the chair said a couple times, this wouldn't change substantive standards for how materials are evaluated, I think is the chairman's point. What it does change, however, is the procedure by which attention can be brought to it and specific people, to the last witness's point, who are put under the light. So I guess the question we've got to ask ourselves is, rather than letting this be, as it currently is, a political determination at the Board of Education level, who has an existing obligation to comply with state rules, do we want to politicize, to add political pressure to more actors in this ecosystem other than just the Board of Ed, or to turn up that volume? Because if we do that, you're going to create the risk that even if somebody, doesn't think that the material is going to violate a certain standard, that they err on the side of censorship or avoidance. And again, all so that we can empower some individuals who feel excluded from the system. So I think that's our main concern. We're going to hear more about it later, but I just wanted to state that for the committee.
I appreciate that, Representative Cloran, but I have to say that we've heard several folks already testify that they already have this process in place. So I don't understand why there's any more political pressure. We're codifying something so that there's a standard across the state that allows for due process. I'm not sure that I get your point about political pressure. The board is a political board. Board of Education is elected in my county. I'm not sure how this creates any political pressure, except that, and I also don't believe it's, these parents come in here and testify. I don't believe they have a political agenda when their daughter or her son is reading something that's as grotesque as what was read to us. I don't think that we're not determining what is obscene here. We're leaving it to the community. And you and I can agree at least on that. We are leaving it to the community. We're not dictating what is obscene from the state level, because I don't think that would be appropriate. I'm going to ask Chairman Sessler. I'm going to give about 5 more minutes for discussion, and we're going to move on to amendments. Go ahead, Chairman Sessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just was to the gentleman's question, and the thing we face with this is, this bill as it's framed has career educational professionals and their designees in the process, which is a committee process, and it's not just a unitary person. It's as well as the elected accountability. It's almost the best of both worlds. You have both. But it also recognizes, when you think about this, Mr. Chairman, this is not Barnes and Noble. These are children who by state law have a mandate or mandated to be in public education. Through the age of 17, you've got to be in school. And so it's not that parents have a choice. Parents are putting their kids in a elementary school, middle school, high school, by law. We, the General Assembly, say by law they have to have them there. It's not a choice. It's they're there, and pursuant to compulsory attendance. Then we're also subjecting them to content that others make decisions about. This is we're a state that requires kids to be in school. So if kids are required to be in school, shouldn't there be a process that parents at least have a process that's defined in state law, not just rule, to be able to raise a challenge of content that by its very definition, that would be against the law if anyone else but a school gave it to them. That's the strike zone we're using. This isn't just made up at the local level. It's a strike zone that says if you give your neighbor's kid this, you've committed a crime. And then there's a publicly disclosed process to support that. So compulsory attendance, content that would otherwise be a crime on the block, but in school it's different. This just, I think, gives parents that balance we're trying to strike. And I think it doesn't go as far as many in the hallway would say. Many are decrying this committee for not giving parents enough rights, but this is that balancing test. And I think this committee would be acting on the side of openness. And I think that's the place we find the right balance.
Thank you, Chairman. This bill has a motion to pass in a second. Is there any more discussion? Representative McLaurin, you got 2 minutes.
It's a proposed amendment.
Well, give me one second then. We got no more discussion here, no discussion. Is there any amendments? Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment that I expect to have the chance of a snowball in hell. But at line 58, after the word months, I would just insert for clarity, or until such time as the local Board of Education reverses its determination.
We have a motion for an amendment by Representative McLaurin. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All those in favor of the McLaurin amendment on line 58 signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? No. Is the opinion of the board the amendment does not pass. Do we have any more amendments? Hearing none, we've got a motion and a second for Senate Bill 226 LC 413138S. All those in favor of this measure passing on to rules signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
It's the opinion of the board that the measure passes on the rules. Congratulations,
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor.
Senator Ambertardi, we've got a piece of paper you got to fill out. We got one in here. It'd be beneficial to you to get this thing moving as quickly as possible, to go ahead and get it filled out and let me sign it so you can go ahead and get in rules. Thank you. All right. Senator Jones. You want to wait anymore? Hold on one second, Senator Jones. Senate Bill 78, Senator Jones, I don't think we have anybody signed up to speak to this, but if you come to the witness chair, Senator Jones, well, you can stay right there. I'll plug you in there. Thank you for waiting patiently. I appreciate it. Welcome to Judiciary Non Civil on a Monday morning.
Yes.
If you present your bill, we certainly appreciate it.
All right. It's Senate Bill 78, and there is a substitute for that. I imagine you guys have that.
Do you have a substitute? Substitute I have is LC 413115S.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. So substitute, I'll just talk about a couple of the changes. Major change would be that in the substitute, we now have moved the felony provision on page 3 to 1 to 5. It originally was 1 to 10 years. So that felony provision is 1 to 5. And so that kind of brings us to the gist of the bill, which is under current law today, what we call revenge porn is basically a high and aggravated misdemeanor. And the question becomes, when a person does quote unquote revenge porn, but they actually put it on a pornographic website or a website that deems itself to be pornographic, that advertises itself that way, does a high and aggravated misdemeanor fit that particular crime. And what this bill does is say that it does not, and so therefore it makes it at least a felony 1 to 5. When you look at the facts that when you're talking about putting on a pornographic website, even though most of us may think that Facebook and our Twitter account is the whole world, in reality, it is not. When you're talking about putting something on a pornographic website, you're talking about something that gets 3.5 billion hits a year, over 120 some odd million hits per month. This bill is not coming out of thin air. It's coming based upon what's been going on over the last year, where we've seen an increase in revenge porn being placed on these particular websites. New York Times did a article, front page article called Children of Pornhub, which dealt with the fact that children, rape, and of course also revenge porn was on this particular website. The Guardian did an article stating Pornhub should forget about the coronavirus crisis and concentrate on their own pandemic, which is revenge porn. Based upon that, various things have been going over all in the last year. Bipartisan legislation in Congress has been introduced to allow persons to be able to sue pornography companies for revenge porn. MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal have stopped allowing their products to be used on these services. All of this is because of the revenge porn that has been going on their sites. And many of these sites now require for you to verify whatever is placed on their product line. And for instance, Pornhub went from 13 million videos to 9 million. So they lost over 4 million videos because they could not be verified. The proper term of this is actually called image sexual abuse, which is a serious crime. It is not necessarily a mistake or just a crime of passion. It is one that basically applies to mostly women. 90% of the victims are women. And it is one that takes a lot of effort actually to do. It's not a matter of just pushing send on your phone. Because of the verification process, you're talking about a person that now is skipping through, is finding a way to go through the verification process, finding a way to actually upload this on the particular site, and then placing that on the site. And the design of that is beyond just your Facebook account. The design of that is literally to destroy another person. One individual had 400,000 hits, 400,000 views of her basically engaged in sex. Another young lady had over 400 messages sent to her from persons she had no idea who they were, many of them encouraging her to commit suicide. This has become a rampant problem. It is one that is escalating because the normal quote unquote revenge porn is not enough. It is basically a gender related crime. And so when a person doesn't get what they want, which is I guess to get the person back or whatever the revenge is, through their normal channels of just placing it on Facebook, they take it a step further to where they want the whole world, if possible, to actually see which was normally their former partner engaged in sexual activity. Based upon that, we say that a person who does that, high and aggravated misdemeanor does not articulate the crime that has been taking place, and that it should be elevated to a felony, and it is just a 1 to 5 year felony. And with that, I'll accept any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Senator Jones. We do have one person signed up to speak to this. I think it's Jill or Maisie Land out there in the hall. If you'd come make your way in here. Does anybody have any questions for the senator while we're waiting on Jill or Maisie Land to come in? Representative Bodie.
Yes. I'm sorry, I keep pushing this for you. Mr. Senator, I apologize. What's the bill number again? I was just looking
SB 78,
78.
LC 41311-5S.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. Yeah, line 23 through 24, would that be other social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that would be still the high and aggravated misdemeanor. That's,
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mr.
Mhm.
Representative Smith.
I waive, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to call one more time Gatco from in the hallway. Are they online by any chance? Representative McLaurin.
Actually, I'll give him a chance, but I'm not sure. I don't think they're opposing this.
Okay.
Yeah.
They signed up to speak to it, but all right. Well, we don't have anybody signed up to speak. Senator Jones has given us the rundown. Is there any discussion by the committee regarding this piece of legislation? Hearing no discussion, now would be the appropriate time for a motion. We got a motion and a second. Do pass. Is there any amendments? Hearing no amendments. All those in favor of the passage of Senate Bill 78 LC 413115S signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Like sign. The measure passes the rules. Congratulations.
Thank you,
Senator Jones. We've got those forms in here. If you want to go ahead and get that knocked out, it'd probably be beneficial to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think we got two more measures, folks. Bear with us. I don't think they're going to take the time that these few other pieces did. Chairman Ballinger, are you going to present House Bill 85? Yes, or excuse me, Senate Bill 85? Yes. All right. What number are you? 11. I recognize Chairman Ballinger to discuss Senate Bill 85 LC 413137S.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do appreciate everybody hanging with me so that we can maintain a quorum and get this bill through. And this is to do with a hazing bill. People may or may not know there was a Max Groover who is a young man. He graduated from a local high school in Roswell, went to LSU and passed away in a hazing accident. His parents have, as residents of Roswell, have made every effort to strengthen our hazing bills that we have in the state of Georgia. So this just clarifies some of our hazing and strengthens it. On lines 19 through 24, this just defines what hazing is. Through 26 through 37 just basically specifies what organizations within the university system of Georgia at individual colleges are involved in. Article 3 refers back to a lot of those definitions. 49 through 52, e-schools shall establish policies to facilitate the reporting and public disclosure of reports of alleged or confirmed incidents of hazing. It goes on to describe the public disclosure. Public disclosure is again mentioned on line 66 through 76, but it does not, you cannot personally identify any individual student. You'd be in violation of FERPA. And section 4 just gives a right of action against the school. So I would like to commend and appreciate and applaud Chairman Setzler for all the hard work that he did. I know it was a bit of a hot mess. This bill was a bit of a hot mess when it came across, as most Senate bills usually are, and we very much improved the bill as it worked its way through the subcommittee process here in the House. So I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chairman Ballinger. And I'm going to reiterate that the bill was much more lengthy than it is now, and it's been boiled down and a little more succinct to the issue we're facing. And I again appreciate Chairman Setzler working through this. I'm going to recognize Chairman Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I still have some issues with this, and I want to walk the committee through my kind of logic here. And I think that as a policy decision, we should discuss, I think what would be some very easy hypotheticals that stand to come out of this. And, I'm mostly focused on lines 19 through 25, the expanding definition of haze or hazing. And let me just first state that I am in no way trying to pour ice water over the bill and the seriousness of the bill and the seriousness of incidents that have happened, not just at LSU with the Georgia student, but have happened at Georgia colleges and universities. But I think that that this is so broad that it potentially it applies in a lot of scenarios. It could apply in a lot of scenarios that I'm not sure it's what we want or need to do. And, I look at starting in 19, haze or hazing means to subject a student to an activity. Okay, well, let's read this in a broader way, which is certainly possible that it could be read in a broader way. An activity is undoubtedly a party. A party is or a social gathering is undoubtedly an activity. And that's current law, but it's limited to endangering the physical health. But then from there, we're going to go on to expand it. Causes are likely to cause a student to violate federal or state law. So if you host a party that causes a student to violate federal or state law, so if you host a party and there is alcohol at that party, and a minor chooses to be in possession, finds alcohol, and is now in possession, which is a violation of state law, then I believe that it is arguable that you've triggered this statute. Further, in line 22, or causes likely to cause a student to consume any food, liquid, alcohol, etc., in a manner which subjects the student to substantial risk of sickness, vomiting, intoxication, or unconsciousness. I completely get what we're trying to cover here, and I would first argue that I think what we're trying to cover here very well might already be covered under the existing law of endanger the physical health of. But again, under this logic, if you have a party and if you host a social gathering, if you're any organization at a college and you host a social gathering and you cause someone to consume alcohol to the point that they're intoxicated, again, by simply hosting that organization or hosting that gathering and having that party, it could be argued that you have caused this situation to happen. I think we're missing some kind of intent, and I don't think we're capturing what we're trying to capture here is when individuals are forced to participate in, they very well may be willing, but they are forced to participate in such things that cause these things. But I think that as this is written, even if you took out or is likely to cause and you just limit it to cause, I think that what we're doing here arguably would make anybody that has a party where somebody violates the law or where somebody becomes intoxicated, you could be subject to this, which then triggers the civil liability. And I don't have an issue with the concept of civil liability on this, but I think that we are opening the gate in a substantial way with the broadening of this definition. And I'm not opposed to trying to better define what hazing is, but I have a lot of concerns that this bill is too broad right now.
Chairman Sessler.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, to the gentleman, I appreciate the gentleman's words. Part of this was the effort with the substitute was to try to bridge the senators and the representatives' intentions with something that was in a civil structure. In essence, the gentleman had a policy objective, the author, to broaden the definition of hazing. And then it was our committee's objective to take that definition, modify it as we need to, which is what the gentleman's raising. I'm not philosophically opposed to what you're saying. I'm just saying the work, the substitute was intending to try to kind of bring that over, narrow it appropriately, define it, and then also put it in a civil structure where the real hammer becomes potential civil responsibility. That was kind of the effort that got us here. I can speak myself as a member of the committee versus what's here. I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, rather than, let me just speak to the gentleman's question about likely to cause. speaking for myself as a member of the committee, I myself have some concerns with the likely to cause as opposed to cause. If there's a causal link, then I'm comfortable with the language. Likely to cause, I'm speaking as a member of the committee, that raises some concerns for me as well, Mr. Chairman. I would say the language in causes medically verifiable physical harm, or as it's intended to be understood, medically verifiable severe emotional distress. There's a causal link in that element. Likely to cause, again, speaking as a member of the committee, I share some concerns, but what's presented as a substitute was just intended to bridge the Senate version of this concept.
Well, Chairman Sessler, I appreciate that. And it's the intention of the chair to just hold this piece. You two, we can talk offline and get this thing going. We got one more measure to take up. So if you guys are not opposed to it, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes to say your last piece. We'll hold this piece, Chairman Ballinger, and do a little more work on it. We'll get it out tomorrow if we can. And I'm
not trying to hold it up, but I think that we could narrow it a little bit.
That's fine. Representative McCorn.
Just very quickly, I mean, I completely agree with Chairman Reeves. I think right now, every single underage student who goes to a party and drinks 1 beer has a trial with punitive damages on the verdict form against a fraternity or any persons who assisted them at all.
Thank you,
It's
Representative
incredibly.
Representative Bodie.
But when you add athletic teams, and I'm looking at Chairman Chuck F. Stration's mask. So if you got a freshman that's saying that all freshmen have to carry.
What's wrong with your mask? You're worried about us mask.
About us, yeah. I would say my school as well. If you're carrying the seniors' shoulder pads at the practice, we don't want to open University of Georgia or Valdosta State.
I don't think that's the intent, but I understand where the gentleman's coming from. Let's do some more work on this. I'll commit to the chairman that we'll work on moving this thing forward. We just got to tighten up just a little bit, if you don't mind, Chairman Ballinger. All right, let's move on to Senate Bill 117. I don't think the Senator Miller is here, but we have someone to stand in. Will you introduce yourself and present the bill to us, please?
Yes, 4.
We got Senate Bill 117 LC 413139S. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what the bill does?
Yes, Tyler Mashburn, General Counsel, President Pro Tem Butch Miller. Senator Miller, unfortunately, had several other commitments during the course of this meeting. He was unable to attend, but I do appreciate the chairman's indulgences in allowing me to speak to it. I think I will actually probably defer to the solicitor from Athens, Clarke County, C.R. Chisholm. He has signed up to speak. He has helped us and helped be an informative member going forward on this. And I understand that there is a committee substitute that I think he wanted to speak to after having reviewed it. And I'm obviously welcome to accept anything, but we did hear this in Chairman Reeves' subcommittee, I think 2 weeks ago. But should the committee find it agreeable, I believe I would allow Mr. Chisholm to speak to this measure.
Thank you. Go ahead and have Mr. Chisholm come in. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Chairman Setzler to give an overview. He worked extensively on the subcommittee or the committee substitute. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 117 language tracks largely with this concept of person in position of trust. The thinking here and the policy goal of that came across from the author was that the coaching relationship and the agency relationship is tied to coaches in a school setting. It did not apply to, as was the purpose of the bill, to address coaches in a club league setting, piano teachers where perhaps a student's going to someone's house taking piano lessons. So the goal was to keep this educational and supervision kind of fact pattern nexus together, but apply it outside of a school setting. That's what the person in position of trust is intended to do here. It did, much as we did last session, we had a bill that came through that addressed the circumstances that had been overlooked in the past of foster parents. It adds improper sexual contact by a person in a position of trust, first degree, second degree. It's structured really as it exists under current law. A couple cleanups were made beyond that, but that's what it does in its essence. Again, I think it's love to hear what Solicitor Chisholm's got to say about it. But that's what the bill substantively does.
Thank you, Chairman Sessler. I'm going to recognize C.R. Chisholm, who testified in subcommittee, and he's intimately familiar with this bill. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I did want to speak to the substitute, and I'm not going to go through all the facts of the case. I've already been through it in subcommittee before. But as you know, we did have 2 cases in Athens, Clarke County pertaining to one defendant. So I had 2 victims, one defendant perpetrating on both of those victims. He was a soccer coach. They were soccer players. They were training with him privately, individually, and that's when he stretched them, and he used that stretch as a way of a vehicle for him to touch them under their shorts on their genitals. So when I met with the families, the overwhelming message from those families was this was somebody we trusted. This is somebody that we had known for years, and that he abused that trust, and he molested my daughter. Essentially was paying for him to molest my daughter. And so that's why we like the language, the position of trust, because it captured the facts of our case, or both cases. The substitute now has language in it that says entered into an express agreement. With one of the 2 cases, that language concerns me because the Cameron, whose mother spoke at the subcommittee, had been training with the defendant for years. She had started at 14. Her mother would take her and pay for the training sessions. And as she got older and into high school, as a senior, she was driving herself. And during the time that she was training and the touching started, her mom was no longer driving her, and he was no longer taking payments, even though Cameron was trying to pay him. He said no payment necessary. So I'm concerned with that language, express agreement. It doesn't capture exactly what we wanted. Certainly, I think implied would also work there. So the language, if you just add it, express or implied agreement, I think that would capture it, because there was certainly an implied agreement or position of trust there from having been training with him for years before that. The whole family trusted him, and they trusted him with their daughter's safety and well-being.
Well, I appreciate that. That was something that we wrestled with, and I'm if the author is friendly to your amendment, I'm certainly friendly to the amendment. But so what we're trying to catch is, and a lot of times these relationships are sort of informal. So I guess that's what what you're nervous about is there's not we're not paying you $75 a month or $75 a lesson to coach our kid. You're thinking maybe there's a friend tagging along, and that wouldn't catch that if the offender.
That could be the case, yes, sir. And even I'm looking at my own boys. They've gone to hit and batting cages and things like that, and there would be a coach there working with them, and we'd pay for that. But there was no oral or written agreement for that, as you would expect in an express agreement. But there certainly was an implied agreement that they were there for instruction and training, and that they were going to be supervised and educated in that way.
Yeah.
So I think if you certainly would, the other victim in the case, there was a much stronger evidence of an express agreement, because the father had paid $500 for her to be trained by him all through the summer. And she and her sister would go together occasionally, but for the most part, it was her by herself. So there was a pretty good evidence of an oral express agreement there, but it doesn't work that way in every situation.
So give me the scenario again that you don't think it will reach with the expressed agreement.
Well, in the two scenarios that I can think of is one from my own personal standpoint. When we take our boys, we don't do that much anymore, but we used to take them and they would hit in cages and pitch, and they would get personal training. But there was no oral or express or written agreement for that. There was just, here you go, we're gonna do some training, and it was just implied that there was going to be instruction and there was going to be payment for the instruction.
Okay, I got a bunch of lights flashing here. I'm going to go to the committee. Chairman Sessler.
Mr. Chisholm, appreciate your raising the issue. The express agreement issue is one where, I mean, the circumstances you're talking about are all for financial consideration. I mean, I think this committee could, as we've said before, if we can define the fact pattern we're talking about, we can write a bill that does that. The goal for express agreement was that it's not just a informal, oh, he's hanging out somewhere and this happens. You know, I think that the substitute is, if you're paying someone consideration for something, that's an express agreement. You give them $20 an hour for a batting cage, you give them $75 for 3 lessons for something else, that's an express agreement. Now, you know, certainly there's always an openness for better language. The goal with express agreement is that if there's financial consideration, it is an express agreement. If you're exchanging consideration beneficial, whether it's financial or some other means, then there's an express agreement. Secondly, if there weren't financial consideration, making an express agreement, but there was an express agreement that was not for beneficial consideration, but was expressed, i.e. you're a volunteer coach, you coach my son. You know, when I was a soccer coach for 8-year-old girls, I wasn't paid a dime for doing it, but there was an express agreement. I was the coach. I went through a criminal background check. And if I were picking kids up, you know, or I was doing training with them, there's no financial consideration there, but it was an express agreement. That would be different than neighborhood kids hanging out my yard, coming by, and that there's no express agreement there with parents. Heaven forbid this happens to any kid. But the thinking was financial considerations expressed. Or if there was an express agreement that was not based on financial consideration, but was more formalized, that would give rise to this. But it wouldn't be undefinable in anybody, because if it's undefinable in really almost anybody, you almost have this void for vagueness issue that couldn't hold up in court. That's the balance we're trying to walk here. I mean, it's so the word expresses, I mean, I'm certainly not married to that word, but the purpose was something clear, volunteer, or for consideration, which would be an express circumstance.
Thank you, Chairman. Recognize Chairman Reeves.
Thank you. You know, and I think that the way I look at this is a lot of what we do up here is a certain fact pattern happens in Georgia, and we realize that the law as is doesn't provide a remedy in something that I think everybody would recognize is wrong. And I have no issue with carving, you know, with addressing that like we do every year, and trying to figure out a way to make better of our laws so that we can capture these things. But the way I look at this, and the concern I have, is that while adding implied agreement may get us closer to what your goals are, but what else does it open the door to? You know, and that's where, how far do we want this to go? And I know that we've talked with this committee for 3 years, put this structure in the law right now, and we painfully went through the process of being deliberate in how we limited it. And I don't have an issue with what we're talking about, but my concern is that when we open that door into something that is less definable, you know, than is a 21-year-old, you know, shift manager at Chick-fil-A and a 17-year-old employee, you know, is there is that an implied agreement? That is supervision there. I mean, I just think we get into a gray area that I'm not completely comfortable with how far that goes. And I think what our intentions are clear. And so I agree with Chairman Setzler that just because there's not necessarily a written agreement, a contract, so to speak, you can have an express agreement without having it being reduced to writing. I mean, I as he just said, I'm coaching T-ball right now, and I absolutely would look at this as having application to me as a T-ball coach in the same way that Chairman Setzler said with soccer. But I wonder if potentially understanding that that at least our intentions are that express agreement not be so narrow, but that implied agreement might make us, might bring this thing to an ambiguous level that that we just don't know how folks are going to interpret this, and that concerns me.
Thank you, Chairman Reeves. I'd say this, there's limiting language on lines 43. It has to be for the education and supervision. So if the committee were to add or implied agreement, I'm not sure that it would be overly broad because we are certainly trying to capture a coach or a violin teacher or piano teacher. They're educating, and we're leaving them for hours with our kids, sometimes without us there. I mean, I dropped my son off to baseball practice, and I would certainly want anything happening there to be reached by this statute. So I understand Chairman Reeves's point that we don't want to be overly broad and we don't want to capture innocent actions. I would like to err on the side of the kids. Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think one thing I would like to highlight in terms of the context for our conversation, though, and to sort of, supplement the comments we've heard, is that this is a unique creature of law that has been cultivated by this committee, and it has a sentencing range that reflects a departure from normal circumstances, right? That don't involve the specific degree of trust or placing under control. And I think it's important to note, at least in my reading, every single other pathway to liability under agent and employee involves some element of express agreement, right? So the idea that introducing the idea of an implied agreement, I understand that some folks might favor that, but we have to remember that would be a departure from the way that this entire structure is being used. And the sentencing range of 25 to 50 for under 16, which again is the age of consent, right? And that factors in this conversation too, is such a dramatic increase that I think, again, it's kind of like the conversations we've been having all day. We all want to err on the side of protecting kids, but we can have reasonable discussions about the public policy aspect. So I think that's just the element I wanted to raise for everybody.
Thank you, Representative McLaurin. And listen, I'm going to leave this up to the committee. If the committee wants to make the amendment, make the amendment. If not, then don't make the amendment. Chairman Reeves.
Looking at the language on 43, limiting this to education supervision, does that not eliminate the physical therapist hypothetical? If it's education and supervision, how is education? I get a coach is educating a player on. I mean, I'm trying to be helpful. I mean, is that potentially problematic as well?
It is, if that's the factual scenario. So it is absolutely.
And
Chairman Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Chisholm for coming in today and Senator Miller for working on this issue. So I recall very vividly 2019, we drew this statute up. We did it toward the end of session. We used Texas as a model, as a status offense. And the reason that we had to do it that way based upon the relationship is because you could have adults that are having sexual contact with each other that would otherwise be perfectly legal. And because of the nature of the relationship, we had to have the status offense in there. And the way I see Senate Bill 117 is distinguishable is we're dealing with minors. It's very different than that circumstance where you have adults. And so I think that some of the issues that specifically Chairman Reeves just raised are addressed in the bills that passed out of the Senate, because it's an or there for the nature of the relationship. Nevertheless, it's day 36, and I would advocate, Mr. Chairman, we move this bill forward if that's agreeable to, I don't know how you feel, Tyler, but that we move the bill forward at this point, and then we let the legislative process continue to work to see that we get this important gap in the law addressed. Thank you.
I share Chairman Evstration's point. This definitely I'd like to move this piece of legislation forward. I don't want to hamstring it, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, because I think that the point that Chairman Evstration makes is that there is a distinguishing, or there's a difference here. We're dealing with minors, and to me, again, I'm going to point to the education and supervision language here. It does limit it. Chairman Sessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The education and supervision, just for purposes of where it comes from, the idea of coaching was part of this, the arc of this. There was discussion about the supervision component living alone. That gets into an employment setting. You have supervision, then it's any employer. And this idea that the idea to bend someone's will. Yes, we're talking about 16 and 17-year-olds. 16 and 17-year-olds exist in an employment setting. The age of consent is 16 in Georgia. There's some members of the committee who might want to revisit that. Maybe the age of consent ought to be higher. But this is a carve out of that. The thrust of this, I think, as the chair spoke to the Senate author of the bill, we want to address coaches. It's education and supervision address coaches. It's not just someone that's coaching with mom and dad watching. It's them taking them off on their own, having that supervisory in loco parentis status, but it's not babysitters. It's not a boss at work. It's a coach. And that's the education supervision union creates that, but broadens it some. So it's not just a sports coach, but it's also a piano teacher. It could be a camp counselor. Those issues exist there. But again, I think as Chairman Reeves said, consent's not a defense here. Consent's completely stripped from this. And because of that, it's this balancing effect that we've got to, because consent's not a defense, it does need to be limited to a set of circumstances that are more defined. And what this does do, I think the gentleman will agree, is coach, paid for, or there's an express agreement with. That's why we feel like, and as we've talked about this over the years, I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman. There may be a couple circumstances we might like to address that it doesn't capture, but we certainly want to make sure as we do this, and this is not to be, because I do believe it captures both the circumstances you raised. We can't let there be a whole series of behaviors that it captures that we would never contemplate and can't draw a line around. I think I think we do well to be slightly more defined than that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Sessler. All right, we had Solicitor Chisholm. Thank you for your testimony today and in subcommittee. It's been compelling, and this is a very important issue. And we're going to try to get this as right as possible. That's the intention of the committee. So we don't have anyone else to sign up, and we've had a lengthy discussion. At this time, I'm going to entertain a motion. We have a motion to pass. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any amendments? Hearing none. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of passing Senate Bill 117 LC 413139S signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody else? Any opposed? The measure passes on the rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you for coming. We're going to adjourn for lunch.
I was going to take this over to you. So you have